So I'm Jaime Rodriguez. Currently here, I'm the Food Safety and Quality Assurance Manager. But prior to coming here, I worked for a turkey processing plant here in Utah, and I did that for about 3 years. I was the superintendent over all of the evisceration, processing of the live birds. Essentially, my daughter used to call it making the turkeys pink and slippery. That's what I did.
Okay.
So, in that setting, there was a lot of, it's completely under USDA. They had at least 4 members of FSIS there at all times for us to be able to process. That would include line inspectors that are online the entire day. One CSI, trying to remember what the acronym is, Consumer Safety Inspector, I think is what it stands for. And then one veterinarian, and the veterinarian would run the show there at USDA.
Okay.
So FSIS is the Food Safety Inspection Service. It's the arm of the USDA that deals principally with food. We're talking meat, poultry, and egg products. Anything outside that realm that doesn't include those generally falls under the FDA. So the very basic, bare-bone responsibility of FSIS, that branch of the USDA, is to make sure that there's a wholesome product as far as meat, poultry, and eggs go, being provided to the U.S. consumer. There's massive amounts of regulation that are tied into that, both from the farm, from the day they hatch a bird until it's gone all the way through the processing plant and is in the store ready for consumption. They have rules that regulate every process of that, especially in the livestock side of it, beef and pork, those products. In the old days, they would inspect every piece of equipment, make sure it's all clean, and they were primarily responsible for quality assurance in the meat industry. In the 1970s, with the age of the space race and all of that, NASA was looking for ways to provide food that was safe and wholesome all the way up in space. They couldn't rely on cooking or anything else down here or up there in order to protect their astronauts. And so they, in conjunction with a couple of private companies, developed what's called Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points, or HACCP. And that gradually developed into a stronger and stronger program where private companies would take the full responsibility for their food safety. It started with a lot of skepticism from the public, where most of them had been brought up to feel that the government needed to protect them from all of the food manufacturers. HACCP is a way that food manufacturers have been able to show that they are taking care of their process. And so I think it was in the 90s or so, long before I was ever in the industry. I was a little kid back then. But during that time, USDA and FDA started to pull back more and more of their involvement in the actual day-to-day inspection, and they became more focused on making sure companies actually followed their HACCP program, and that it was an effective HACCP program. So there's a lot of different experiences I have with that. The higher you go up with any of these government agencies, you get into a lot more politics, and it's more of a politician than an expert. Perhaps. You know, I don't know the people personally that are up at the top, but they have to focus more on the political side of things. I've seen where companies are contacting senators, and there's a lot of that side that deals with the USDA. And so there is a lot of bureaucracy that trickles down through there. From my experiences, especially in the turkey industry, there seemed to be a lot of disconnect between what was going on the ground with their local inspectors and directions coming from the top. And a lot of times those directions could be giving mixed signals. You know, they could be telling one thing to their inspectors and another thing to the establishment, the company. And so that's something that is a challenge for them. One of the good things is the CFR is very, very clear. You know, it's all spelled out. There's a rule for everything. And so it doesn't leave for a lot of ambiguity, but in enforcement, you tend to see a lot more ambiguity.
Yeah.
So when you, and part of that I think is no one wants to be accused or blamed for a problem if it arises.
Yeah.
They would much rather just stick to the enforcement side or cleaning up the mess. It's a challenge, I think, that's in all of the regulatory bodies. I've never met anyone in the food industry, and I've been in the food industry for a long time, pretty much my entire adult life. And I think by and large, most food manufacturers and workers want to provide a safe product.
Yeah.
We're not living in the days of, Upton Sinclair's book.
Yeah.
We don't live in those days anymore. Most people have been brought up liking to eat clean food.
Yeah.
And I think most of us take a lot of pride in the work we do. And so sometimes I think because of the ambiguity and because of the political nature of these agencies, they can get tied up in the weeds a lot. And so we tend to focus on things that maybe aren't as important towards food safety, so much as it's important to making something look good, but it doesn't actually make it good.
Yeah.
When a lot more time and emphasis could be given towards the things that really matter.
Yeah.
And that just varies from industry to industry. You know, turkey is very different than beef, and beef is very different from further processed foods like frozen meals. They're entirely different needs associated with each of those. And so again, I think with the politics that go on at some of these places, it can present a lot of challenges to the actual real food safety. And part of that is every inspector that comes in, they kind of have their own interpretation of what the regulation means.
Yeah.
Some are very insistent on just going by the letter of the law, which can be both good and bad for the establishment. Others are much more interpretive, and that also can be good or bad for the establishment.
Yeah.